So I'm Cara Pickett. I'm the Assistant Director for the Office of Nationally Competitive Awards. My office for the time being is like right on the other side of this wall, but that is all going to be changing at some point in the near future. But for now, that's where I'm located. So if you ever want to come meet with me about fellowships, which is what our office does, help students apply for that, you're welcome to do that. And I would encourage you to. So as Megan mentioned, today I'm going to focus mostly on sort of personal statement writing. So I'll be talking about this through the lens of personal statements, but of course this is really just about telling your story and talking about what you've done, what you're interested in, what is motivating you so that you can translate that to somebody else to like make a persuasive case for yourself. Whether that's applying for a fellowship, applying for graduate school, writing a cover letter for a job, applying for another research internship, whatever it is. This is a skill that at some point I'm sure you're all going to have to make use of. So, and it's not something that you usually get to talk about or get to practice doing. So that's what we're going to talk about. I will also just tell you a little bit about the office if you're not familiar with it already, and we'll do introductions here, and depending on where you are in your college career, some of you may be interested in some of the awards that our office helps students apply for, so we can talk a little bit about that too. But I want this to sort of be, an open discussion, so feel free to jump in and ask questions throughout, and I'm happy for that to happen. So why don't we just go around the table, since I don't know any of you, if you could tell me your name, tell me what year you're going into in the fall, your major, and then just a little bit about the project that you're doing this summer.
So I'm Rachel. I'm going to be a second year double major in psychology and women's gender and sexuality studies.
Okay.
And my project is with one of the professors in women's gender and sexuality studies. Oh my goodness. It's called What Happens After Activists Win or Lose.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is transcribing interviews with pro and anti-LGBT activists in Kentucky.
Okay. Very interesting. Is that like surrounding a particular action?
Do you remember like 2 years ago after the Supreme Court decision came down and the county clerk, the one woman in Kentucky, gets her,
okay.
and the people that supported her and went out to the courthouse to protest her.
So specifically about that?
Yeah, specifically Moorhead, Kentucky, and
Very
the
cool.
people in that event.
So you're actually getting out and talking, conducting a survey?
I listened to their interviews.
Okay,
and
that's already been done.
them.
Gotcha. Cool.
I'm Jillian. I'll be a second year in political science and operations management. And then my project is through political science. We're looking at the Forbes 2000 list with a specific focus on Asian economies.
Okay.
I'm Madonna. I am going to be a fifth-year senior in physics, and I have a math minor, which is why I'm doing research in math education. And we're looking at how 8th graders use a dynamic geometry system to make sense of their math.
Very cool.
I'm Lucy. I'm going into my senior year this fall, and I'm double majoring in communication sciences and disorders and women's gender and sexuality studies. Long ones. But the first one is pre-speech and language pathology. And the research that I'm doing this summer is with a cultural anthropologist who's studying the unaccompanied minors from Guatemala that are immigrating to Cincinnati, and just kind of getting a sense of inclusion and exclusion dynamics. So I just started actually interviewing people last week. We're looking at, so I have to figure out how to elevator pitch this because there's so many little pieces, but it's just, she calls it social network analysis. She wants to see how all of these schools and NGOs are working together to accommodate this population.
So are you interviewing those people who are offering services, or
Yes.
the population that
I'm interviewing people at the different organizations.
Okay.
She's doing the interviewing with the kids, their families, and then most of CPS.
Okay.
I think there's just some rules about interviewing CPS faculty. So
Very interesting.
So, yeah.
And I'm sorry, did you say you're going into your third year?
Fourth year.
Fourth year, okay. And did you say your name is Madonna? Is
Madonna.
That Adonna? Okay, I was I didn't know if I was hearing it right. I wanted to make sure I was getting it correctly. Okay. Okay, great. So thank you for that. Your projects all sound really interesting. Is this the first summer that you all have done this kind of research? I'm guessing for those of you who are going into your second year, this is probably the first chance you've had to do that. So you've had some before? Okay. And you said you're going into your 5th year, so you'll be graduating in the spring or in the fall?
Yeah, in the spring, and I'll be going to graduate school.
Okay, okay. And are you also graduating in this coming year, Lucy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. We'll say that as though
Yes.
you're both going to be graduating. I'm sure that all of that will work out. So, all right, great. So, I'm going to pass this out. Rather than just sort of sit here and go through a PowerPoint, I have a handout that you can take with you, and hopefully this is something useful. So, how many of you, well, I'm sure you've all had some opportunity to write a personal statement or something like that. When is the last time you've written a personal statement? What was it for? Applying to college, maybe, for 2? Have you done anything since then? Usually the essay that you're writing, like for your college application, is pretty much like a personal statement to some degree. Have any of you written anything? I'm not sure exactly what the application is like for UHP Discover, if there's a personal statement component to it or
No,
not.
not really, not to the same extent by
Okay.
any means. I'm thinking maybe a little bit of the writing that they would do in Gateway in
Mhm.
terms of, which, I mean, this is kind of newer, but the Global Citizen Scholar Plan, their own values and passions narratives. I think some of
Mhm.
that would kind of work into personal
Yeah.
statement-esque, you know.
Yeah, not exactly like a personal statement, but certainly that kind of writing is wonderful preparation for writing a personal statement. So yeah, I think the fact that you all have done that kind of stuff through Gateway and also through having to write up your experiences and reflect upon them for honors is really great practice in doing a style of writing that you don't normally get to do. And I think that's one of the big challenges of writing a personal statement is like understanding the style, understanding how to write and what to write. And so that's, I think, it's certainly much closer, that type of writing that you're doing for honors, than probably writing that you're doing in your classes. And you may find if you're applying for graduate school or if you're applying for fellowships or other kind of things where you have to write a personal statement, that some of that writing is really handy to you. And you may go back at your, look at your portfolio and be like, oh yeah, how did I talk about that experience that I had in my freshman year? So that's actually a really good resource to have. And you'll see as we go through everything today that one of my biggest tips about writing a personal statement, or if you want to be sort of more broad about it, like writing your personal narrative, being able to incorporate the kind of experience that you're having this summer into that personal narrative. Honestly, I think one of the best ways to practice is just to write about it. It's like you're not really going to get good experience writing unless you're writing. Any writer will tell you that, a fiction writer, nonfiction writer, but I think it's definitely true. So one thing about personal statements is that when you're writing something like that, or if you're writing a cover letter, generally you're going to be responding to a very specific prompt. So, if you're writing for graduate schools, you said you're applying for graduate schools. I don't know if you've started on any applications or looked at any of the applications yet. Okay. So you probably have some kind of prompt for the personal statements. So in that case, they're sort of giving you the outlines of what you need to be writing. Sometimes you may have something really open-ended, like just give us a 1,000-word statement about yourself. But of course, it's never really open-ended because you're always writing within the context of something, right? You're writing, who your audience is. If you're applying to graduate schools, you know that you're going to be reviewed by the department, by the faculty members who are going to be responsible for accepting you or not accepting you. If you're writing for a fellowship, there's a board of reviewers who are going to be reviewing your application. If you're applying for a job, you know who's going to be reviewing the application. So I think the audience is actually one of the most important things. So even if you have that sort of open-ended, like write a cover letter explaining your interest in this position, or give us a 1,000-word personal statement telling us why you deserve this fellowship or whatever it is. It's not really as open-ended as that, because it's like, well, I'm telling them why I'm the right person for this specific thing. So that context is always really important. So the personal statement then is your story within the context of what you're applying for. It's your story in your own words, with your own voice. Unfortunately, there's not really any rubrics to writing a personal statement. There's not a formula for writing a personal statement. I do think it can be really valuable to read other personal statements, especially, if you're reading other graduate school essays, or if you're going to apply for a Fulbright and you want to know what other Fulbright personal statements look like. That can be really handy. But I would say do that and do that with with a sort of grain of salt. That's not a thing. That's not a saying. Keep in mind that you have to like take those with a grain of salt, because what one person did very effectively, like I've seen students do this where they've read somebody else's essay and they're like, oh, I really liked how they talked about this, and then they did this move, and then they went over here, and so then they try to kind of shoehorn their own experiences into like this structure or this model that somebody else has created. And that just doesn't work, because that person is revealing parts of themselves and talking about their own experiences, and your story shouldn't look or sound like that. So read them just to kind of get a variety of, or to get a sense of the variety of personal statements, and a sense for the different kinds of approaches and different kinds of moves that you can take. But keep in mind that your personal statement should ultimately be your own thing. So I do just want to sort of go over, I've tried to include some information on here that can sort of get you acquainted with what a personal statement should look like, some things to keep in mind as you're writing. And again, we can, please feel free to ask questions as we go through this. But I think the four keys, as I wrote over here, the 4 keys to a persuasive personal statement are authenticity, honesty, creativity, and relevance. So again, going back to what I was saying before, we'll start with number 4. Relevance is always important. You don't want to talk about like, well, when I was 4 years old, I had this experience, and then I was 7, and I started, in 1st grade, and I did this, and then I went to horse camp, and it was awesome for these reasons, and that, it's like you don't want to sort of go through everything. And in fact, you may have a whole list of relevant experiences, and even those don't all fit in there. So I think you need to, you'll need to pick and choose. Usually you can tell a couple of stories, you're not going to be able to tell all of them, and that's fine. But ultimately your readers should understand why you're telling the story that you are. So the relevance is really important. It should always help explain why you're the best fit for whatever you're applying for. If you're talking about the research that you're doing this summer, for example, what are some ways that you could frame that in a personal statement? Like, you wouldn't just say, you list on your resume, like, did X research, you'd have, your little 1 or 2 sentence description of what it was, maybe what the results were that you found, or the research techniques that you learned. But if you were describing it in a personal statement, like, what do you think would be important things to highlight about that? And I know that you're all sort of at the beginning of your research experiences now, but.
Well, I would say kind of like talking about like what things that you learned, like in ways that you grew from different experiences, but then also maybe I thought I saw something about don't talk about or not liking something, or no, maybe that had nothing to do with this, but I was thinking about my own experiences and how to say what I liked and didn't like about an experience that led to over here, and just kind of how to frame that in a way that was, that wasn't just like I liked this and didn't like this, so then I decided to do this. You know what I mean? So is that what you were asking?
Yeah. So like, I guess what would be? Yes, I think you're answering what I'm asking, but if I'm just to make it a little bit clearer, I guess, like what would be the ways that you would imagine talking about this? So you probably wouldn't just say like, in the summer of what year is this, 2017? Summer of 2017, I did a research project on X.
Right.
Like, you probably wouldn't say that and just leave it there. You'd probably elaborate on it in some way. So what would be the additional detail that you would put in there? What would be the purpose of talking about something like that? Like if you're applying for grad school, say, how would you imagine talking about doing the research that you're doing? What would you want your readers to know about that experience?
When I went and talked to other people who said that they've looked at graduate applications before, they said to talk about the skills that you've gained because of the research that you've done. So I think you should include that in your personal statement.
Absolutely.
Do you think going along with relevance, kind of like the purpose of the research, like going into oh, never mind. Relevance was more about, is it relevant to?
Relevant to the thing you're applying for, but that could be, depending on what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so like let's imagine a situation you're applying to graduate school and it turns out that you love research and you want to go and pursue like a research-based master's or a PhD in your subject area, continuing along with the research that you're doing this summer. So then it would actually be really relevant to talk about like, well, this was my first exposure to this research, and it really, you know, if this was sort of sparked your love of this topic or a particular approach to research, you know, then you could talk about those details, because it would help the reader understand how you got from point A to point B. So, you know, when you're applying for a personal statement, I always talk about like, there's the you that's here applying for something at this moment. And so you want your readers to understand like, what were the set of circumstances that brought you to this point? What experiences are motivating you to apply for whatever it is? What, you know, what about your personal background, or what classes did you take, or what personal experiences or academic experiences did you have that helped bring you here, that helped prepare you to do this, that make you the right person for whatever it is you're applying for. And then you also want to situate yourself, so this is sort of in the middle, the you that's applying for something right now, because then you also want to project into the future. So you want to have a sense of what you want to do in the future. You know, you want to get a master's degree or get a PhD or go on this particular, have this fellowship opportunity. And then beyond that, you want to have some sense of like, well, I want to do this because it's going to help me get to here, this sort of longer term goal that I have. And so in that sense then, there could even be, you know, a through line from the research that you're doing this summer to what you ultimately want to be doing in your career. And if that's the case, then you can connect those dots for your readers. You can make tell that story. But yeah, I think absolutely. This is sort of a lot of the times I think the answer is it depends when you're talking about what is right and what's not right for a personal statement, which is frustrating, but also I think is empowering if you embrace it that way, because it's like, well, you know, for this personal statement, I'll talk about this thing in this way. For this personal statement, I'm not even going to mention it because it doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm applying for. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's also important because you'll sort of start to realize that you can't really recycle personal statements. If you're applying for similar graduate programs, you're probably going to have similar personal statements, but even then you're going to have little things that are going to differ from one to the next. So don't just, you know, it's like, oh, here's another application. I'm just going to like, here's my old personal statement and plop it in here, because it should always be relevant to what you're applying for. Any other thoughts about when you're thinking about research, or specifically, but how you would talk about that, or what would be important to include?
You said skills that you gained. What was motivating about it, or what was inspiring about it?
Potentially, yeah, if it was something that you found inspiring. Even, you know, if it was something that was like, you know what, I did that research that one summer and it really convinced me that I never want to do that kind of research. Right. Like sometimes that can be a good story to tell too. Like it doesn't always have to be sunshine and lollipops. So, you know, sometimes, exactly. And of course, if it was a negative experience, maybe that means it doesn't fit. But sometimes you can tell negative stories as well in a personal statement. So it doesn't always have to be a positive experience. Okay, great. So then the other keys for the personal statement: relevance, authenticity. This sort of goes back to what I was saying before, that like if you're reading other personal statements, you know, to sort of read those with a critical distance, because ultimately, you know, those people are being authentic to themselves and you should be authentic to yourself. So that means authentic in terms of what your experiences have been, but also authentic in the way that you're talking about your experiences. Which again is a reason why it's not super helpful to read personal statements, at least if you're reading personal statements as a sort of how-to guide to write a personal statement. Being honest, so this sort of goes back to, you know, including negative experiences. Like, be honest about the experiences that you've had and what you've been successful at and maybe what you're not successful at. You don't necessarily want to dwell on negative things in a personal statement, but it can be useful to, you know, to demonstrate that you have self-awareness, to demonstrate that you've sort of thought through that maybe an important negative experience was really instrumental in bringing you where you are today. And so that's an important thing to tell. So don't feel like you have to gloss over that kind of stuff. I think, you know, it's always, usually it comes through if you're not being honest and authentic, and so it's always important to keep those in mind. That's just good life advice, I think, but especially in a personal statement. And then the other one is creativity. So again, like, The style of a personal statement is really open-ended. If you're writing like a cover letter, that's more sort of formulaic. So you can find examples of like, here's what you should write in a cover letter, and here's kind of what the tone of the cover letter should be. And of course, you're trying to convey yourself as a professional, and somebody who's really capable of doing whatever the job is. Graduate school, similarly, like you probably want to convey yourself as a serious scholarly person, although I think there's a little bit of room to show personality. So this is another, like, knowing your audience and being able to gauge how much personality is appropriate, how much is not enough. But the creativity is really important because when you're applying for something, you're usually one of several or many applicants, right? So the creativity is important because it can help you stand out as an applicant. So the way that you talk about something, having an interesting opening, having an interesting hook, even displaying a little bit of a sense of humor can be appropriate. Obviously, you don't want to go overboard, but it can be really appropriate. And this is another reason why, and I haven't mentioned this before, but this is a reason why it's really important when you're writing these kind of things to have reviewers, like get other people to read through your stuff. If you're applying for a fellowship, our office can help with that. That's a big part of what we do is we read through students' personal statements. I usually tell students, because one thing, a lot of students are concerned about tone and about how to write things, like, well, I'm worried if I write about this, it's gonna sound corny or really cliche, or I'm gonna sound like I'm bragging or whatever it is. And so I usually say, like, just let yourself write. I will tell you if you need to tone it down or if you need to step it up. I've actually never had to tell somebody to tone it down because they sound too braggy, although almost everybody worries that they will. That's an important thing for you all to keep in mind because as women, I think we are often like much more prone to like underplay what we've done and not own our accomplishments. But in a personal statement, you really do need to own your accomplishments. Like you need to sell yourself because if you don't do it, no one else will. Like this is your chance. You're responsible for sort of tooting your own horn. So, don't be afraid to do that. Okay. So then the other thing, I do want to talk a little bit about the things that a personal statement is not, because this can also be a useful way to think about how to frame what you're doing. How to talk about what you're doing. So it's not an academic paper, usually often if you're applying for something, you may have another, a statement of grant purpose or a research proposal or something that goes along with your personal statement that has that more serious sort of tone. So that's not what it is. You're allowed to use I know a lot of times in academic writing, you're like trying to not use I at all, but this is a place where you can talk about yourself, use the word I. It's not a resume in narrative form. Often you're presenting something else that is a resume, or you're filling out an application where you're kind of listing those resume pieces. So you don't just want to repeat that, and sort of list every accomplishment you've ever done and every club you've ever joined and every research experience you've ever had. It shouldn't be overly confessional. It's okay, of course, to be personal, and if you've had a really, if you've been through something difficult or had a tragedy or something sort of really life-changing that you want to talk about, that's absolutely okay, as long as, again, it's relevant to the thing that you're applying for. But you don't want to make your readers feel awkward and make them feel like they're sort of peeking it, like they're reading your personal diary. That's also not appropriate. So you do want, again, like make sure that you're presenting yourself as the person that you want those reviewers to see. It's not necessarily a chronological life story, although it may, again, pick and choose from, sort of early childhood life, a high school experience, a college experience, and then to today. So you may go through a chronological narrative, but you don't have to include everything. And it doesn't have to be chronological, that's the other point. It can go a lot of ways. And then the other thing is a plea or a justification. So it's not, if you're applying for graduate school, it's not like, I would be so honored to be accepted, or it would be, this would be such a wonderful opportunity. I'd avoid using language like that. I think, again, I see a lot of students do this. I think I probably see more female students do this. But again, I think there's often a tendency to sort of acknowledge oh, I know how much I've been blessed. I know what a great honor this is. I would feel so grateful if you would select me. This is not the appropriate place for that kind of thing. So again, if you're applying for something like a fellowship or graduate school or even for a job, it's they know it's great to work there. They know it's going to be great for you to go to school there. You don't need to tell them that you think that's great. So just sort of keep it factual. Keep it to, who you are and why you're appropriate for this. You don't need to tell them that it would be a great honor to be selected for whatever it is. And that can be hard, so maybe just, you might write that the first time just to get it out of your system and then edit it out on subsequent times. Okay, so I don't necessarily want to go through the rest of this stuff, but at this point, does anyone else have any questions, or just sort of reading through this, is there anything that pops out to you that you have a question about?
About how long should it be?
Usually they'll tell you. So for something like a graduate school essay, they'll tell you to write a page or 2 pages, or it'll be a 1,000-word limit or something like that. So usually personal statements aren't much longer than 2 pages. I'm trying to think. I don't have any examples where you have to write for more than that, but even a page or a page and a half is usually the limit. So, but that does bring up an important point, because you are limited in what you can write. So that's actually can be a difficulty that you're facing, is like making sure that you get everything, you're expressing yourself clearly and concisely, and you're saying all the things you need to do in this limited amount of space that you have. One piece of advice that I have, and I think this is down here in the tips for brainstorming, but especially if you're writing with a page limit or a word limit in mind, is when you're doing your initial drafting, just forget about the page limit. Like, chuck that out the window, just let yourself write, because it's always easier to edit things down to fit into a word limit after the fact. But if you're if you're writing and you're like, oh wait, I can't say that because I only have 1/3 of a page left, I only have 100 words left, I can't include that thing, then you might be sort of artificially limiting what you can say and important insights that you can reveal about yourself. So give yourself some permission at first to just write, and if it goes to 5 pages, that's fine, you can cut stuff out. Like, sometimes even the process of writing, I think, can be really revelatory in terms of what is useful and what's not. And you may actually end up writing something that's like, oh, that's actually the perfect way to say this thing that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I've never really put into like a good 1-sentence summary. So sometimes like the process of writing can be a really good exercise in itself. So give yourself permission to do that. And if you know you're going to be writing a personal statement for something, give yourself some time to do that too. So, giving yourself a month or 2 months. And it doesn't mean that you're working continuously on it for 2 months, but you do an hour here and an hour there. Give yourself some space from it, because that can be really useful too. And that way, you give yourself some time to have other people read over it and to go through numerous drafts, because that's really the way ultimately to get to a strong personal statement, is giving yourself the space to do that and enough time to revise and sort of perfect what you're saying and how you're saying it. As you think about the prospect of writing a personal statement, so imagine putting yourself in the position you will be applying for graduate schools, or putting yourself into a position where you're applying for a job or for a fellowship to go overseas, or for a graduate program or whatever it is. And you're having to write about yourself. Why do you want this scholarship? Why do you want to be in this graduate program? What do you imagine would be some of the challenges of that kind of writing? Yeah, so thinking about yourself having to write a personal statement, having to, write in a single page, why are you the right person for this, whatever it is, for this scholarship, for this graduate program? What do you imagine will be challenging about writing that personal statement?
I mean, I personally am just really bad at talking about myself.
I don't think you're alone in that.
People ask me about myself and I'm like, what? Who am I?
I mean, I actually think that's a really important thing to bring up, because I don't think you're alone in that. You're certainly not the first student that I've talked to who's like, I feel really uncomfortable talking about myself. And a personal statement is challenging, because that's what you have to do. It's all about you, right? So even getting to the comfort level of being able to talk about yourself and how to do that can be really challenging, absolutely. What else?
I guess being too general, because I know on all my first drafts for things like that before, where I had to write about why I wanted to go to a college or something, I wrote specifically about how maybe I know I'd have a lot of opportunities here, but then that's not useful at all.
Mm-hmm. So how did you address that? Like, because you mentioned this happened when you've written things before, so what did you do?
I sort of just left it and moved on, and then I would go back and do a little more research and thinking about the school in particular and what excited me about it when I visited or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that just helped, I guess, and it got better over my drafts.
And how did it get better? Like, what did you, rather than saying I'm excited about the opportunities, what did you say that you felt like was a better version of that?
In some places, I talked about a specific internship program I knew was available, or a specific like club or area of interest. And then here, I talked a lot about the honors program because it was so unique as compared to the other schools I was applying to.
Do that too.
Okay, great. So I think that's actually, it's good to be aware of that, because I think you're right that is a pitfall of writing. And that's, that's a surefire way to writing like a terrible personal statement, is just being really broad and vague and not being specific. So it's good that you're aware of it, and it's good that you have some strategies, I think, for addressing that, because I think you're exactly right. The more detailed you can be, the more stories you can tell, the more specific examples you can draw on, the better it's going to be. And I think that goes towards, whatever it is you're applying for, so doing your research, making sure you've done your homework, that's really important. But just as important is when you're talking about past experiences. So again, like if you're talking about this research that you're doing this summer, or if you're talking about, a service trip that you did, or a study abroad experience that you had, a particular honor seminar you were in, as one of your honors experiences, like, you want to tell a story about that thing, talk about a person who inspired you, or like a particular day on your study abroad trip that you really had a moment of realization or something. It's like you want to get really detailed with those stories about yourself, because those are much more revelatory than saying oh, and I studied abroad in Spain for a semester and it changed my life. It's like, okay, well, that's a starting point. That's not an ending point. So you need to tell us how it changed your life. Like, what happened? What was the thing that you experienced? How did your research for the summer, change your life? It cemented my desire. Now I know that I definitely want to be a researcher in this field, and I want to look at these kind of issues. So again, telling us how you got from point A to point B. Connect the dots, which I think is another one of my tips there. So yeah, great, thank you. What are some other things that you imagine might be challenging?
Being in my 5th year, I kind of have a lot to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So editing, in other words, paring it down,
Yeah.
Yeah, that can definitely be, that's a struggle. And I guess one of the ways that I would recommend addressing that is to just, again, let yourself write all of that stuff. And you may even want to give yourself, if you give yourself enough time, you can write a couple different versions, maybe you can see what happens if I focus on these activities? What happens if I talk about this thing and I don't talk about this other thing? So giving yourself some room to experiment, and also giving yourself enough time to be able to do that when you're putting together your personal statement. Another thing, and actually I'll pass this out at the end, but so I have some activities here. You can see on the back side of this sheet are some activities about how to get started with a personal statement. You may also just find this useful for even doing some of your personal reflection writing, for your honors experiences or things like that. But this is sort of a long list of questions, and I think that this is a really good sort of brainstorming tool for a personal statement, because this is about 25 questions, asking things about classes, asking things about, people who've helped shape your values, important things that have happened in your life, how you like spending your free time, just a bunch of different questions. And my suggestion with this is to just take some time, write a paragraph or two on each thing, and answer a lot of these questions. And what you'll notice is that probably the same things will start to come up again and again, either the same experiences, or you'll start to notice patterns and themes that emerge, even if you're talking about a couple different experiences. So that can be really useful to help you sort of realize what those patterns are, because then you might not be saying well, when I was a sophomore, I did this thing, and when I was a junior, I did this thing, but rather you can say something I realized from my freshman year that I was really passionate about math education. I don't know if that's true for you, but let's say I was really passionate about math education, and through this experience that I had and doing this and this, I realized how much I love it. And so it's like then you can incorporate multiple things, but you're kind of drawing that theme, you know, it's like it's revealing your passion for math education or for whatever it is. So again, sometimes just writing and sort of laying that stuff out can allow you to see patterns that maybe would be harder to notice if you're just kind of, you know, sitting there like, what am I gonna write about? How am I gonna write it? So, yeah, thank you. Any other challenges you would anticipate? What about sort of the words you use or the phrases you use? Like, do you think it's a concern, like if you sound cliche or if you're talking about, you know, if you're talking about research, like what if 100 other people are talking about research? Like, is that something that you think you need to worry about?
That's something that I worry about when applying to like, yeah, to research specifically. It's like, I want to show them that I know about the area. I want to be honest, but if it's something that I know a little bit about, I have noticed myself at times like maybe try to sound more knowledgeable than I actually am, and that's not a good idea. It's just, you end up sounding like an idiot. So, but like, so maybe that's something that would be maybe just like a cautionary thing, like, you know, if you're applying specifically to a project that you know a little bit about, like be honest about what you know and don't know about, I guess. But I don't know if you're asking about. I need more coffee today.
I feel that. I was writing an email, this was like actually like just last week, applying to a research lab at Children's, like for a research back with them during the year. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm so underqualified, I'm never gonna get this, I have no experience. And in the email I wrote, I had mentioned, like, I don't have much experience, but, like, I'm hardworking, I'm a fast learner. And I sent the email to my mom to proofread, and she goes, don't tell them that you don't have experience. Like, don't make yourself sound worse than you are. But, like, you can't make yourself sound like you know more than you do, but you can't, like, because I do have some experience.
Yeah, it's a fine line, and I would not say universally don't mention that you don't have any experience. I absolutely get where your mom is coming from there, and I think sometimes that is the right way to go. But I think also sometimes you can sort of turn that into a positive, you know, it's the elephant in the room. It's like, okay, well, you can see on my resume that I don't have this thing that you say you're looking for. Like, I'm just going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't care about that, or like why I have other things that make up for the fact that I'm missing this thing. So yeah, in that case, you can sort of talk about like, well, here's some other experience that like, here's some things that I've done that let me believe that I would be good in your lab. Or in this particular case, I'm imagining that it's a lab with a topic that you're really, really interested in. And so I think sometimes, maybe it's not, but you know, whatever is exciting you about applying for that opportunity, I think sometimes just conveying that enthusiasm can be really valuable as well. You know, like, I'm so interested in like working in this lab for these reasons, although I don't have a lot of experience like this, you know, because I'm just finished 1 year of college, like, you know, people shouldn't expect miracles from you, frankly. But you know, it's one of those, it's like, yeah, I don't have a lot of experience, but like, let me tell you, here's what I've done and here's why it would be good. So I do think that sometimes you can turn that around and make that a positive. And again, sometimes I think it's noticeable if you're missing something, or if you have sort of some kind of a black mark in your history that's gonna show up elsewhere, it's like, they're gonna know that, and it's almost weirder sometimes if you don't mention it. So sometimes it can be a trick to like know how to talk about negative things or a lack of experience or knowledge in a productive way.
I was gonna say, that for the research that I'm doing this summer, I mean, I don't have any background in anthropology, and so I did kind of like what you were saying, like gave background on the experiences that I thought would lend to, you know, this project, and then kind of, you know, I think I listed like a couple of just questions that I had in mind, like just like, you know, about all of the work that she was doing, and I think maybe, you know, if you're applying specifically for a research project that you don't have a lot of experience with, like maybe including some of the questions or things that you're like intrigued by kind of shows that you like you know, you're enthusiastic, you're somebody that questions, and like you're reflecting over, you know, bigger, critical, issues, so.
Absolutely, I think that can go a long way. And I think that what you said also kind of brings up another point, which is that usually if you're writing a personal statement type of essay or a letter, a cover letter or something, you know, you want somebody to select you for something. Like that's usually where this kind of writing comes into play. And so generally you have read through a description or, you know, of what the opportunity is, of who it is they're looking for. And so you do, I mean, that's part of, I think, being honest with yourself. Like you do want to make sure that you're a good fit. If you're really off base, I mean, I think there's nothing, you know, there's no personal statement in the world that's going to make you seem like you are a good fit for something that you're really not a good fit for. So sometimes it's really just being able to assess honestly at the beginning, like, well, maybe I shouldn't be applying for this because I can't address these things. I can't make this case. But then I think, you know, when you're talking about things like, there's a lot of people who probably are a good fit in most ways and are maybe really excited, hopefully are really excited about whatever it is they're applying for, and they have one or two things that are missing, or one or two things that are maybe they're anticipating are not going to be as good as some of the other applicants. So again, I think that you can, you know, you can fill those gaps in other ways by emphasizing what you're excited to learn or by emphasizing what you find really thrilling about doing this. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Anything else? Okay. So I do, as you saw on the back there, I have a couple of activities, and I'll just pass this around as well, and I will share digital versions of these with Megan so that she can, actually I have all of your emails, I can just send, if that's okay, I'll just forward the digital copies so that you have these. Like I said, this can be a really useful thing. I mean, you may just find this useful to do initially, and then you have it to refer back to when you get to the point of wanting to apply for other things. Of course, you know, if you undergo like a major change, like you came in as a political science major and then you decide like, nope, I'm gonna do something totally different, then it's probably good to revisit these questions and sort of fill those in again. But you may find that doing this once is actually a useful thing to refer back to help you when you have to do this kind of writing. So this is a good exercise, and then like I said, on the back side of this sheet that I gave you are a couple of activities. And so most of these are just about brainstorming and free writing and kind of identifying, you know, identifying core values, helping to identify like what's important to you, identify the kinds of things that have influenced you in your life or that have helped shape who you are. Being able to draw on those things is going to be really important. And I know even if you're just talking about cover letters, like, you know, like a lot of adults, I went through several periods where I was applying for lots and lots of jobs. And one thing that I did was actually kept sort of like a master resume and a master like cover letter that had like phrases and paragraphs that I could kind of pull out and tweak and put together for each new thing that I was writing. Because, you know, I'd start from scratch and I'd be like, oh, well, actually that cover letter that I wrote for that thing is going to work pretty well here, but I just need to make some key changes. So I found that having just kind of a list of like, well, here's a bunch of professional accomplishments I've had, here's a bunch of things about me, so I could sort of pick and choose, you know, sort of do a mix and match kind of cover letter. I think that can be a good way to go. I think that's a good way to go if you feel comfortable with your writing, because one of the tricks with that is that then you have to make sure that everything sounds cohesive together and that you can write strong transitions that makes everything flow together nicely. So if you're less confident about your ability to do that, then maybe that's not a good strategy for you. I think sometimes writing personal statements is just a sense of having an honest idea of what your strengths are. Like if you're a good writer, like, you know, something like that you may find really useful. If you don't feel as confident with your writing, then you may want to take a different approach. So yeah, so those are some activities. Again, like when you get to the point where you have to write a personal statement, these are some good places to start. I have a checklist on the back here for some things that to keep in mind when you're writing a strong personal statement. There's a couple things here that I didn't necessarily mention. One that I wanted to hit on just before I wrap this up. I have here a clear theme or idea and a unifying thread running through your essay. So in the same way that you would write, you know, a thesis statement for an academic paper, I think sometimes it can be useful to have a sort of thesis statement in mind for your personal statement. Now, of course, you're not going to write it in the same way that you would like an academic thesis statement, but sort of having in the back of my mind, you know, like if the reader, you know, the reviewers for this fellowship or for this graduate program are going to come away with like a 1 or 2 sentence impression of me, like what is that going to be? What are the things that I really want them to know or understand about me? So having that sort of framing idea in mind can be really useful as you put together your personal statement. Because ultimately, you know, they're probably not going to remember all the details. If they're reading, you know, 200 applications for something, they're not going to remember everyone's details. They're going to remember like, oh yeah, like that was the rock climbing, like, you know, the person who's a rock climber who wants to be a radiologist, or like, you know, that was the, you know, the reporter who has, you know, did the stories about, you know, veterans or something like that. So I think it's, you know, having that kind of thing that identifies you, the sort of hook for your reader, can be really a useful thing to keep in mind to help make sure everything stays together and is cohesive. And then the last, I did put out a resource there. This Writing Personal Statements Online is a useful resource. There's a lot of sample personal statements there, and he has a lot of information about writing personal statements for graduate school and also for specific fellowships, along with samples of all of those things. So some of that is sort of longer versions of what we've been talking about here today, but if you're looking for additional resources, that's a really great place to start online. Any other questions about personal statements? One other thing that I forgot to pass out here. This is just a sheet that I like to pass out to people. This is advice for writing personal statements, and I'll just let you peruse this in your own time. But some of this is about, you know, sort of keys to keep in mind when you're writing personal statements. You know, the first one again is sort of letting yourself just kind of free write and turning off your internal censor. The second one I think is really great, shitty first drafts, like everybody writes those. Sometimes, again, I think it's good to just give yourself permission to write something really terrible. One piece of advice that I often give students, you know, the student who's worried about sounding too corny, or the person who's worried about sounding obnoxious, is like, well, like, write down a story about yourself, and then, like, write it in the most, like, cliche, like, corny way that you can, or like write down this thing and then be as like bragging, as obnoxious as you possibly can be, because if you sort of let yourself go to the extreme, you can see what that looks like and then be like, okay, what I was doing before was not nearly as obnoxious as I thought, or, you know, it's like, actually, here's the ways that I can scale that back and so not sound, you know, do the thing you're afraid of, and then it's easier to avoid it. So yeah, so those are just some little tips. And then we have about 10 minutes, and I just wanted to, like I said, give you a little bit of an overview of what our office does, because some of you may be interested in applying for fellowships in the future. So as I mentioned before, the main purpose of our Office of Nationally Competitive Awards is to help students apply for a set of these national prestigious fellowships and scholarships. They provide funding to do a lot of things. Sometimes they can provide funding for graduate school. Some of them are things that you can apply for as an undergrad. Some of them you might apply for at the end of your undergraduate career for doing things post-graduation. There's a wide variety. But the list here with the listing of awards, this is what we call our core awards, and most of these you have to apply through UC in order to be eligible. So that's one reason that our office is here, is to help facilitate that process. So that's just a really brief description of some of those awards, giving you a sense of like roughly when you can apply and what the award would be for, as well as when the campus deadline is. Usually these awards have a campus deadline that's 6 or 8 weeks before the national deadline, because the campus process usually involves like an on-campus interview and things like that. So, so that's why that campus deadline is listed there.
Talk about like some maybe like examples of Fulbright research that has been funded?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fulbright is a really interesting one, and I'm glad you asked about that, because I think that's the sort of one that it's really open to almost anyone. Like if you've ever been interested in going abroad and, you know, spending some time there, doing research, applying for a Fulbright is something that almost anyone can consider doing. So the first time you're eligible to apply, actually for those of you who are graduating this coming year, you could apply this fall if you wanted to. So if you're interested in that, you should come talk to me, because you should get started on the application this summer. But a Fulbright grant, they're available in about 150 countries. You can teach English abroad, you can do an independent research project, you can do graduate study abroad with a Fulbright. They're about year-long grants. The research projects generally can be anything, these are open to students in any discipline. So the research project can be anything that you'd like to do. The tricky thing is that you do, one thing that they're looking for is that the project is well-designed, well-designed and well-defined. So you want to have a sense before you go of like exactly what it is, you know, why do you need to go to Norway to do research on mental health clinics or whatever. So, you know, you should have a clear set of research goals in mind, like what you're hoping to do, why it needs to be done in that country. And then one of the other things that you need to have is an affiliate set up in that country who's sort of essentially a sponsor for your work, a sort of informal sponsor. So if you needed like lab space or if you needed archive access or something, that person would be there to help you make sure that you could get access to all of those things.
What about, like, do you have to go abroad or can you do research in the US?
For Fulbright, it's all abroad. I'm trying to, do I know of any fellowships that would allow you to do research in the US? If you're in graduate school, depending on your discipline, there are a lot of like very specific disciplinary fellow, you know, like there might be one for anthropology or for political science. I mean, most of those have their own fellowships, and sometimes those will provide funding, like, you know, if you're funding for a dissertation or to do research. But I don't know of one that's similar to Fulbright that would fund that kind of thing. But yeah, so Fulbright would be anything outside of the US. And it's not every country, but it's most countries that are not in the US. But yeah, it can be a really, like I said, if you're interested in doing graduate school in the UK or in Australia, if you're interested in, you know, just spending a year abroad before you go on to a job or to graduate school, like I said, you can teach English abroad for a year through Fulbright. There's a lot of opportunities, so it's a good scholarship to consider, and it looks good on your resume if you have that. So. But yeah, you can see we have drop-in sessions every Monday at noon, but you could also email. There's a sort of general NCA email, but my emails are at the bottom, and you can feel free to email me directly. And you should all have my email because it was on the one that Megan sent this morning. So if you have specific questions or if you wanted to set up an appointment with me just to talk through more like, you know, what would I be good for, or this sounds really interesting, tell me more about it, you're welcome to do that. And then the backside here is really just a kind of overview of like what you can apply for when. It gives you a rough sense of what those things are for. Most of them, there is this GPA listing here. Most awards don't have a specific GPA requirement, but some of them, this will give you a sense like of the GPA you need to be competitive for a grant. So that's a really rough guideline. There's only one or two on this list that actually have a GPA requirement. Most of them are more open-ended than that. So yeah, so are there any other questions about fellowships, about personal statements, about?
Do you have any recommendations for like building your resume, like writing out your resume? Mine has just been like sitting and waiting to be edited, and it's horrible. It needs like a template or something. I don't know if you have like a resource that you like.